A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay, and welcome to a slightly unusual location, which one or two of you might recognize by the curved wine cellar behind me. It's one of the finest wine cellars on the planet, and as such, I am a very happy Dan, because I'm back at Ellerman House, and I'm not alone. I'm with one of the finest sommeliers in the country to go with one of the finest cellars, who you'll recognize, I'm sure, from the sommelier series we did with Niederberg just a little earlier on this year. Wayve, a very good evening.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the wine gallery at Ellerman House. Happy to have you back. Sorry about the weather, but looking forward to tasting some interesting, awesome wines this evening.
As am I. And if there's weather outside that's not so good, it's a good reason to stay inside and drink some wine.
Exactly.
And I've been eating a little bit of that over the last few days. And I remember our conversation when we had the sommelier series, and you were talking about the places you've been at the test kitchen, you've been in Maldives, all these exotic spots, but saying that there was just something so special about this. And it's probably worth reminding people, if they've forgotten or they didn't see the sommelier series, just why this place is so close to your heart, why it's such a perfect place for a sommelier to call home.
Yeah, well, I mean, if anyone watching has had the pleasure of visiting Ellerman House and visiting our beautiful wine gallery, it's home to over 10,000 bottles of wine. One of the special things about that, though, is that our collection is purely South African. Paul Harris, who owns Ellerman House, he's very proudly South African, and he wants to showcase the best of what South Africa produces and what they have to offer. So we've curated over probably 20 years, an incredible collection of wines from, current releases going all the way back to the early 80s. I've chosen some interesting wines for tonight. I think some of them with a bit of age on it as well. I think also the beautiful thing about the wine gallery is that it's not only a working wine cellar, but it's a very unique, bespoke piece of art in itself. With incredible, unique pieces all over, and I'm sure you can see in the background some of the incredible things that are on offer here.
It's worth jumping onto the website and having a look. The art collection is just staggering, and this is a place that pretends it's a luxury hotel, but it's so much more than that. It's this great wine cellar. It is an art gallery. It's a place for great relaxation. I do have to correct you on one statistic, though. It used to be 10,000 bottles in the cellar. We got here on Saturday. It's a little closer to 9,000 now. Mrs. Nicol has been quite thirsty on her holiday. And just some of the wine, and it gives such a good illustration of the breadth of the wine list here. And by wine list, I mean a phone directory. Some of the wine we've had some 2007 Gravel Hill Shiraz from Hartenberg, which just drinks so beautifully. Battle of the Shannons last night. Skurfberg, the 2012 versus the 2013, which was just fabulous.
Wow.
And those are just a couple of the wines we've been through. And it's probably the toughest thing here. It was a tough job to give you, because you've got to pick just 3 wines from the 10,000 that you have. I'm battling to get through as much as I'd like to while I'm here.
This morning I sat in front of the wine list, and we've got a big collection, and there's so much that you want to showcase when it comes to South African wine. So, I had a short list which I changed a few times, and I thought I'd like to show wines that I think excited me recently. Obviously over the last few months, I haven't had the opportunity to taste a lot of wines. I haven't really had the chance to attend any events or tastings. So these are wines I think that probably from this time last year until this time now have really excited me. So,
well, I am excited if you are excited.
Cool.
Before we get to the first one, tell me a little bit about the last few months. Has Ellerman House just been a ghost town and shut down like everywhere else?
We have been closed. So officially we are opening on the 1st of November. As you know, Ellerman House is majority of our guests are international travelers, mainly British, European, American. So we've chosen to kind of just hold back a little bit until the summer arrives and until we will have some foreigners and some travelers. But we have had a few people over for events. So we are slowly starting to return back to business. But however, all of the staff have been, we've been really lucky. We've all been kept on. So we've had a full team of staff. So everybody's kind of got rolled up their sleeves and got their hands dirty. We've been doing a lot of renovations. a lot of like cleaning and maintenance and things that you don't get the chance to do when you have guests here all the time. So it's been, in a way, there has been a silver lining in that we got a lot of things done that we haven't had the opportunity to do. So yeah, deep cleaned the cellar, found some really cool old gems. Yeah, so we haven't been doing nothing. We've been really busy.
Well, and raring to go with the hotel as a whole. Headlined by the wine, which is my favourite part of the Ellerman House experience. You've chosen 3 for us.
Yeah.
What is the first one you've got lined up, Wayve?
Okay, well, this was a wine that really excited me last year. I mean, so this is the Peter Ferreira Cap Classique. It's the 2013 vintage of the Rosé, the Brut Rosé. I know the Blanc de Blanc has received a lot of praise, and it's such a stunning wine, but I thought, you know, tonight I'll showcase something that hasn't necessarily had as much attention as the Chardonnay. So this is, I will just pour some for you.
Fantastic. It's an appropriate wine to have because, as you'll remember if you're watching the show last week, we had Peter Ferreira himself, the man behind the wine at Graham Beck, on the show, and he really is the godfather. I asked him what he thought made him so special when it comes to the making of Cap Classique, and he artfully avoided the question. So I'll ask you instead. Here's a man who threw his own label here, the Peter Ferreira and the Graham Beck, that's wowed the world from presidents and onwards. What is it about the Peter Ferreira touch?
Well, I mean, like you said, the godfather of South African method Cap Classique. He's had decades and decades of experience. Not only is this wine made from grapes sourced from really top-class vineyards, so it's a combination of grapes from Elgin and from the Slangenhoek Valley. It's 100% Pinot Noir, and it's been left on the lees for 6 years, which I think a lot of the top cuvee champagnes receive that kind of treatment, but not a lot of South African method Cap Classiques. So yeah, it's had time to age on its lees. It's a 2013 vintage. It was degorged in November 2019.
Sure.
Yeah, so taste and see what you think.
It's a glass of history. The Peter Ferreira Rosé, my first glass of it. And it will not be my last. There's a real richness to that, isn't it?
Agree. It's got this just perfect sort of like elegant balance between red fruit like cherries, lots of like fresh berries, but also this fantastic sort of savory kind of almost Gruyere buttery character, which comes purely from aging. So I was lucky enough to enjoy a bottle of the Blanc de Blanc on a special occasion, and I think the rosé is just as good. Different, but just as good.
And you definitely get that, subtly, but you definitely get the Pinot Noir characteristics come through.
Absolutely.
Which you don't always get in bubbles from Pinot Noir. Possibly that extra time just bringing the character out and giving it more of a sense of place. And
I think also a real sort of like thorough understanding when it comes to the winemaking, when it comes to the grapes, of somebody who's probably got the most experience when it comes to sparkling wine in South Africa. And this is the product of decades of experience, I think. So.
Now, he's got plenty of experience making this. You've got plenty of experience drinking it. And I remember when we did the sommelier series, it was bubbles as well. Yep. So it's clearly a personal favourite of yours. You've worked all over the world. And don't give me an answer as Wayve, the South African. Give me an answer as Wayve, the international sommelier. Objective as can be. Our Cap Classique versus the top champagne houses. In your opinion, how do we fare?
I think in terms of quality, a method Cap Classique is absolutely up there. They will never be the same because these grapes are grown in South Africa. It's a lot warmer. The soils are completely different. In Champagne, it gets super cold. The soils are very chalky. There's a lot more sort of like lime content in the soils. But I think different wines, but in terms of quality, I think they're certainly on par, especially something like this. Yeah.
Oh, this really is lovely. And this for me is great on its own. I'm running through my head the list of dishes I would happily wash this down with as well. And just having that more body and a little bit more a set of shoulders on it. Yeah. And it's going to work beautifully with pretty much anything, I think. It's just lovely. All right, off to a flying start. We are one wine down. What's our second wine today?
So the second wine that I've chosen is probably my most exciting taste of what I got to taste last year. And this is a wine from a winemaker named Jan Smit, who for a long time was the winemaker at Untitled in Franschhoek. It's called the winery is called Damascene. It's a Semillon, so it's a Semillon from very old vines in Franschhoek. The vineyards were planted in 1942, which, if my maths is correct, it's like around 78-year-old vines.
Sure.
And Semillon for me, let me first pour you some, can go either way. You get that sort of like very cool climate, Bordeaux style of Semillon, which is, I find showing a lot more sort of like herbaceous, grassiness, and then you get something from older vines, slightly warmer climate, Franschhoek in particular. And for me, Franschhoek Semillon it's so unique, and it starts to show all these sort of like richer citrus, but like sweet citrus characters. The wine it's dry, but it's just got so many layers. And
I think what makes this particularly interesting is if you look at Jean's former home of Untitled, I think as fine a wine as they make is their Semillon.
Absolutely.
And so he's got history in this particular space, but now doing it on his own terms.
Yeah, and if I speak correctly, there was probably only around 700 bottles of this wine made in the 2018 vintage. As soon as I tasted it, I thought, okay, this is the perfect cellar for it is at Ellerman House. And I think even it's probably around a year later now that I'm tasting it again, or since I bought it in for the cellar, and it's even just kind of like evolved so much more since I tasted it last.
Oh, that's a splendid pick. So I have a bottle of this, and we've had Jean on the show, but we didn't try the Semillon. We tried a couple of others. We tried his Moyamique, the Pinot, and I can see why you're raving about this. And you're not the only one. I think it was Maylou Lambert who recently wrote a piece about Semillon, old vine Semillon from Franschhoek.
Okay.
Which she's absolutely mad about.
Yeah.
And again, you understand why. So for people who watch, and we try and do this as often as we can, this is as much about educating me as it is anybody else. A lot of our watchers aren't people who've studied wine. They just simply enjoy it, which is exactly as you should. What is it about the old vine? Because we hear a lot about it. We know Rosa's done all this great work with the Old Vine Project, but in very simple terms, why is a 78-year-old Semillon vine giving us something that perhaps an 8-year-old wouldn't?
As I'm sure many of the winemakers who've been on your show have mentioned before, when it comes to old vines, as the vine gets older, it will eventually start producing less and less fruit, but the fruit that it does produce will have a lot more concentration, a lot more flavor. I think that's what makes old vine wines. It gives it this kind of like depth and concentration of flavor that a young vine simply cannot achieve ever.
And we're particularly seeing it with Chenin, and Chenin is being celebrated as never before. But the flip side to that is some of the grapes we aren't seeing quite so much of. And Semillon is one of those ones that I think it tends to fly under the radar a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, there are not a lot of examples of there are a few examples of incredible Semillon in South Africa. A couple of them go into really iconic blends as well. Rosa Kruger that you mentioned is one of the people responsible, I think, for kind of like reinvigorating these old vines. For me, this wine, it's difficult to explain a wine to somebody who doesn't have it in front of them. But if you've had any experience tasting Sauterne, which is the very special sweet wine from Bordeaux, for me, it's showing a lot of these like sort of same characteristics that a Sauterne will show, but without that sweetness. It's got this like concentration. It's got this kind of velvety sort of silky texture that a youthful wine from young vines will never have. It's like liquid silk when you taste it. It's a really special wine. And again, just like the Wayve Semillon, it's something that you could really only achieve from old vines.
Absolutely love it. Also, again, as with most wine, it's terrific with food. If you're recommending this to somebody at Ellerman, what are you instructing Peter Tempelhof to whip up to accompany it?
Gosh, I think, well, when it comes to pairing a dish with this, concentration or intensity of flavor is really important. I mean, for me, the first thing when it comes to pairing food and wine is pairing wine and food of equal weight. And as you can taste, this is intense. It's got this like sort of concentration. So it's also got this lovely sort of acidity. So anything with enough sort of acidity, I think maybe like a Cape Malay dish, I think will work perfectly. The spice, the aromatic spice, but not necessarily heat.
Yeah.
A bit of creaminess, a bit of lemon, I think will work really, really nicely with this wine. Yeah.
All right. On to Mr. Delivery I go. This is done. I see Grant Sauls watching us on YouTube saying that Semillon is my second choice after Chardonnay, especially the Buchenhardt's Clos 4 or the Villera 2010. Two fabulous wines there, Grant. Good picks. Is Semillon a tougher sell? Do you find when people are coming in, especially internationally, is it one that's harder to get onto people?
Well, I think in South Africa, it's not necessarily as commercially popular as a Sauvignon Blanc, as a Chardonnay. When you're talking on an international level, Semillon's often included, as I mentioned earlier, in a white Bordeaux blend, but then it's not necessarily labeled as Semillon. So people will be familiar with the white Bordeaux, but they won't know that it's Semillon. So yeah, it's not an easy sell, but when it comes to, I mean, we are really lucky at Ellerman House because as a professional working sommelier, my job is to recommend food and wine, and our guests, they trust me. So it's a really good food wine. I mean, I spent a lot of time working with Marco Janse in Franschhoek at the tasting room at Le Quartier Français, and we paired a lot of Semillon with her food, which was a kind of reinterpretation of a African-inspired European style of cooking. And Semillon works incredibly well with that. And I know that Peter Tempelhof's kind of idea of cooking is very similar to that as well. So yeah, a really lovely food wine.
Oh, no, this is exceptional. And I love the fact that it's just Semillon because much like Merlot in red, we tend to see it in the background with Len.
Absolutely.
As opposed to shining its own star.
So yeah, I think this is something very special. Hopefully, if you happen to find it at a shop, do yourself a favor and get yourself a bottle. You don't necessarily need to drink it immediately because I think it's got enough power and enough acidity and enough life for it to last for quite a long time still. So if there's any left.
If there is. It's 600-700 bottles made.
Yeah.
Okay, so not many going. I shall cherish my one bottle that I do have. I'm also really glad you mentioned the age because this will keep, I think some of the examples I mentioned at the start of the show, drinking some 2012 and 2013 Skufberg, had some 2015 Molyneux Chenin, just those few extra years turned something already extraordinary into pure magic.
I mean, Eben's wines, I think when they're in their youth, they've got this lovely sort of like youthful freshness, but they just change so much as they get older. And I've had the privilege to taste some of his really old vintages of the Palladius. I mean, we've got his Columella going back to 2002 on our wine list. And they kind of just take on a totally different character. But I mean, still like very positive. There's nothing negative about it, but they develop so beautifully. So.
All right, we've had two absolute belters so far. Before we go into the third wine, take me back to your international time and somewhere like the Maldives, where you're getting people by definition probably got a bit of money and they're traveling to luxurious outposts. So price is not so much a factor. And when that comes into play internationally, people tend to gravitate towards French wine because that's perceived as being the best. Did you have much South African wine? What sort of response was there to South African wine?
I think where I was working, again, I was in a really lucky situation. It was a resort owned by LVMH. It was called Cheval Blanc, so it was almost like the sister property of Chateau Cheval Blanc. And guests, they were mainly European and probably from the Middle East, money was no option. It was really just about drinking the best wine. So yeah, we had some iconic South African wines on our list. We did have Eben's wines. We had one or two of R.D. Badenhorst wines. We had some of the Villafante, the de Toren. And I think people who have got a palate that's quite adapted to drinking American wines, they really fell in love with South African wines because it's got this like intensity or something I find in South Africa, a lot of South African wines that French wines don't necessarily have is this like sort of like intensity of fruit, which is not a negative thing. It's a positive thing, and it's a good indication of our climate and our winemaking style. But yeah, I mean, they were very open to it because they were obviously getting access. They were tasting the best that South Africa has to offer. So it was quite a nice feeling introducing people to South African wines and them just being totally blown away.
Oh, I love hearing that.
Yes.
Good for you, South African wine champion.
Yes.
All right, and also champion sommelier and have I got it right? Master Court sommelier?
Court of Master Sommeliers, certified sommelier.
All right.
Yeah.
Which basically means you can pick up a cork and tell me where the winemaker went to school. It's a properly hard.
Well, technically, it's my job to have done the research in advance, so I should be able to. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, you've certainly won me over with 2 of our 3. We have one last one to go. And this is important, not just because of who's made it, who's a great winemaker, but also because the bottle in question refers to a quite cool event this weekend.
Yeah. So I've chosen as my 3rd wine was the red wine is the Cederberg CWG David Nevo Syrah. It's called Tien die Hoog. It's from one of the highest vineyards in the Cederberg on the farm, which if anyone has visited the Cederberg, they'll know it's pretty high altitude. I mean, this is over 1,000 meters above sea level. And this is, it's actually the 2010 vintage. So I think the current vintage that's available now is 2017. So I thought I'd give you a taste of something that's had a bit of time to age. Wines like this, I think, can always benefit from a bit of age. So yeah, and I mean, it's got quite it holds a special place in my heart as well because I've got some interesting stories, I think, from my visit to the winery a few months ago.
Do you tell?
Well, I was really lucky to be invited up to stay at Cederberg Wines to taste through their wines, and it was around July, and it was like one of the worst storms we've had this year, and it was just like bucketing down with rain. And we got a call from Cederberg, and they said, "I hope you're not planning on coming up here." And it was like 2:00 in the afternoon, and we were almost there already. And they're like, "The road is flooded," but of course we decided to try get through. So it was a flooded road. We were in a bakkie and we thought, no, it's fine. We're in a bakkie. We'll make it through. It's fine. We get like halfway through the river, get stuck in the middle of the river with water like up to the door. Luckily, there was a tractor that towed us out, and the really nice people from Cederberg Wines came to fetch us and took us back to the farm. And so it was a disaster that turned out to be a really special, memorable time. So Cederberg wines will always hold a special place in my heart as well. And I'm really excited to taste this wine. So
this is David Nevo. You may remember he was on the show quite early on in lockdown with his Chilean partner as we discussed that particular range. I don't think we've had too much of the actual Cederberg on, and this falls under the Cape Winemakers Guild label. And it's a really exciting time for the Cape Winemakers Guild, because amongst other things, the first woman at the helm.
Exactly, which I think you'll probably be seeing a bit more of or hearing a bit more of in the next few days. But yeah, so this 2010, I mean, I've only had a chance to taste through this vintage a few days ago. We've got some of the 05, 06, 07 in the cellar, and I think it's just developed so beautifully. So I mean, have a taste, see what you think.
I actually really did sneak one. I'm going to sneak another larger one. I'll tell you what this is. This is old, warm, comfortable slippers by a fire.
Absolutely.
Roaring logs. It's just this is comfort wine. If you think comfort food. This is comfort wine.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a good example of really like a great Shiraz from South Africa. It's still got so much acidity. It's still got so much tannin. It's got this like intense sort of like dark berry, dark cherry, almost sort of like coffee grinds, little bit of I would say almost like this dark black olive character. Yeah, and this is definitely a food wine as well.
Oh, this is absolutely lovely. And it's always interesting that Cederberg, other than I think there's this and there's one other small private producer, but otherwise it's not really a wine area.
Yeah.
And yet such majestic wine consistently comes out of it.
I agree. And I mean, if anybody has ever taken the time to go and visit the winery, it's literally like being on a different planet. It's I don't know if you've ever been up to Cederberg Winery.
I was supposed to go this year when I was down for the Cape Epic, and then it got called off at the last minute.
Okay.
That would have been my first visit.
It's really, I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful there. I mean, the soils, the mountains, just the geology of the whole area. And then where you are you're probably like 50 minutes drive away from any civilization. And then suddenly there's like vineyards growing everywhere. So it's incredible what they've done. And I think I struggle to think of a more difficult area to make wine, just to like due to its location and the fact that it's so far away from everywhere. It's such high altitude. It's I mean, when it rains, you can't get out, you can't get in. And what they do up there with what they've got, or their lack of access to things, is really incredible.
It reminds me a lot of the Samantha Lismore story, Samantha Keith's story, Lismore, when she wanted to make wine in Grayton and everyone told her she was mad. And we know what she's done now. The vision, mad or otherwise, that must have been involved in saying, right, I'm going to have a crack at making wine in the Cederberg. And it's come off.
I mean, absolutely. And I think, I don't know how long they've had vineyards up there. But I know David Nevoet and his family have been up there for generations and generations. And I think, I mean, every farm you see a sign, it's like owned by Nevoet family, but a different member of the family. But I think he had the vision of planting vines up there, which, I mean, has clearly paid off, because not just this wine, but their whole range of wines is really fantastic, I think, in different ways.
This is absolutely lovely. And it is to be expected, because the way the Cape Winemakers Guild works, correct me if I'm wrong here, each member submits a wine specifically to fit into the Cape Winemakers Guild selection. Is that right?
Yes. And it's the winemaker who's associated with the guild, and not necessarily the property that they're at. And I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to attend many of the auctions, but I've been to a lot of the pre-release tastings, and I think this is something, it's like a unique special wine that is really special to each winemaker, that obviously is not available anywhere else except at the auction. So it's your opportunity to try something that I think you won't ever have access to otherwise, unless of course you come to Ellerman House. But,
correct. Ask for Wayve, she'll sort you out. This weekend the auction takes place. Normally it would have been one we could all attend. For the first time, it's Bonhams out of London, and it is taking place on Saturday. And it's just a really special opportunity, because it's, as you say, limited edition wine. And it's wine that is the wine that the winemakers themselves have said, you know what, I think this is quite special.
Going back to the Peter Ferreira wine, I mean, the sparkling wines, or the Method Cap Classics that he submits to for the guild, are just absolutely mind-blowing. But of course, not very easy to get hold of, but really mind-blowing. So if you ever get the opportunity to buy a bottle for a special occasion, they are amazing.
Well, we'll be able to give you even more detail about this on Thursday, because next week's guest is the aforereferenced chair of the Cape Winemakers Guild, and she, which is very important, she will be with us, Andrea Molyneux, and talking through some wine, possibly one or two other surprise guests. So really, really excited about that. I genuinely am about wine. Before we do let you go and we can polish off the rest of this wine, which is looking lovely, I'm fascinated by your career, by what you've done, by where you've been. If you could look back over this remarkable career, traveling the world, working with some of the best chefs in the world, some of the coolest locations in the world, I won't restrict it to one because that's impossible, but pick out for me a handful of wines from your time in the industry that for one reason or another have meant something in particular to you, just said something special to you.
Well, I think the wine that made me fall in love with the wine that sort of like really got me thinking was the 2006 vintage of the Saudi family Palladius. I was working in London at the time, and I went out for a lunch with an Australian sommelier, and that was the wine that he chose. And I mean, I must have been like 23 or something then, and you don't have a lot of access to like wine of that quality when you're a student in South Africa. So I tasted it, and there's just so many layers of flavor, just the depth and the concentration and the intensity, and it just completely blew my mind. And after that, I was just like, wow.
Were you already in the wine game at this stage?
I was an intern. I was at hotel school. So I studied at hotel school, and then I went over to the UK to do an internship. So I wasn't really necessarily in the wine industry, but I was working at a Michelin star restaurant. Okay. And after that, I was just like blown away, and I just wanted to taste more. And then I think over my travels, I've been lucky enough to taste some incredible champagne. I love champagne. So a couple of old vintage Krugs from my birth year as well. Being the head sommelier for Cheval Blanc in the Maldives, we had probably maybe 30 vintages of Cheval Blanc, but being able to taste the iconic 1947 vintage of Chateau Cheval Blanc was something really special. Yeah. And then, of course, it was last year. I had the opportunity to go to Lanzerac and taste the 1959 vintage of the Lanzerac Pinotage, which, believe it or not, was my dad's birth year. And I think the first commercially available bottling of Pinotage, and that was really special. So yeah, I've had the chance to taste some really cool wines.
Oh, I'm very, very, very envious.
Yeah.
As I am of the fact that you get to work here, are there still pinch yourself moments when you wander into that cellar and you look around?
Every single day. I mean, not just for the incredible collection of wines, but just this. We are just working in the most beautiful, beautiful place. And I think every single day when you look over the terrace and you see the Atlantic Ocean, I think you feel really grateful to be working here. And I mean, we've been, all of us here at Ellerman House have been really lucky. Not only do we have awesome owners of the hotel who've really helped to look after us, but also our guests. They've all, and although a lot of them are not able to join us this year, due to travel restrictions, they've all been emailing and sending videos, and we've developed some really nice friendships with them. So that's been really great as well.
It is a unique place, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. I'm supposed to be here until Sunday. Sunday afternoon, we start nailing up the doors, and they will not get rid of us. We're here for the foreseeable future. Last one from you, Wayve. You've been in the industry for long enough now. You've got all that experience. The South African wine industry going forward, we've taken a big hit this year.
Yeah.
We're well aware of that. Where do you see South African wine over the next 12 to 18 months? Who's going to struggle? Who's going to succeed? What's your vision for South African wine over the next stretch?
Well, I think, sadly, I think a lot of producers are not necessarily going to make as much wine next year. I mean, they're probably still sitting on a lot of stock from this year. And I think it's really just about finding export markets now as well, and being able to sell the wines that they haven't been able to sell. So most likely smaller quantities next year. But I guess exports are the way forward for the producers. And it's up to us in the hospitality and restaurant and off-consumption industries or sectors to kind of help as much as we can as well.
Still some storms ahead, but we'll get through them with the help of a good glass or two, and I've had 3 of them. So to recap, we've been trying away 3 of her personally selected favourites. We've had the Peter Ferreira Bubbles, and I know you watch the show from time to time, Mr. Ferreira. That was a great addition and lovely to have had you on the show last week. We also had some Semyon Jean Smith with his newish project at Damascene, and then wrapping up with the Cape Winemakers Guild Shiraz from Cederberg, David Nieuwoud. And that will be, well, not this particular wine, but David will be showcased at that Cape Winemakers Guild auction. A couple of things I need to remind you of. We still haven't announced the winners of our Heritage Day competition, but I will confirm those on Thursday with Gareth Robertson from Anthony Rupert Vena, our steak and Syrah contest with 4 cases of wine to give away. So look out Thursday, and on Thursday we'll have Andrea Molyneux, who'll be chatting to us about the Cape Winemakers Guild. It's a really special weekend coming up for her as the newly installed chair, and what an inspired selection that has been. Speaking of inspired selections, thank you, Wayve. They really have been 3 delightful wines. And what I'm going to do now is go downstairs into the cellar and then just lock myself in there and not come out and go and explore it. If you get the chance to Ellerman House, there are many reasons to come down. The art collection is splendid. The hotel itself is magnificent. Peter Tempelhoff does a dazzling job with the food, but for me, it's the wine that headlines the whole show, led by Wayve and her team. Also, if you're not, and I don't know why you wouldn't be, because it's absolutely free, but if you're not a member of the Pick and Pay Wine Club, make sure you do so. You simply send through your smart shopper number to that number on screen, to 36775, free of charge, and you get, amongst other things, 3 times the smart shopper points. You also get a 20% discount on a selection of 10 different wines every month, and there are free orders above a certain threshold if you're buying online. So a great way to support the South African wine industry, which is exactly what they do here at Ellerman House. And I leave you with a reminder of what Wayve told us a little earlier on. Paul Harris is a very passionate man. He's a good friend of mine, and Paul only has South African wine in the cellar. He could have wine from anywhere in the world, but he knows South African's the best, and so that's why he has it. Wayve, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's been a delight seeing you again. Thank you for some terrific wine.
Pleasure.
And keep enjoying this terrible job you have to do.
Cheers.
So there we go. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. I'll be back again on Thursday with Andrea Molyneux. Until then, drink plenty of South African wine. Stay well. We'll see you on Thursday. Goodbye.